It all started when a hood named Willie Byoff picked the wrong Chicago nightclub to celebrate his first big scam. Byoff had just extorted $20,000, a fortune in 1934, from a movie theater chain owner named Barney Balaban. Byoff ran up a $300 tab at a club run by mobster Nick Dean.
Nick Dean, who's connected a lot higher than Willie Byoff is, notices that Willie Byoff is buying $100 bottles of champagne, and he's thinking, what is going on here?
To find out, the leaders of the Chicago mob took Byoff and his partner George Brown on an involuntary ride.
They said, you fellows are into something, and we have to have a piece of it. We want 50% of your gross, or else. Byoff and Brown were not happy, but they had no alternative, and the mob at that point was cut in for 50%.
George Brown belonged to the Projectionists and Stagehands Union, called IATSE, the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees. He and Byoff had just pulled off a scam that operated in any number of cities around the country. By threatening work stoppages, showing pictures upside down, and dropping stink bombs in the aisles, corrupt union locals extracted big payoffs from theater chains. Syndicate head Frank the Enforcer Nitti realized the scam had tremendous potential. Nitti wanted to go where the real money was: Hollywood. So the Chicago mob called in its man in L.A., Johnny Rosselli. He explained that Hollywood studios paid for their productions with ticket receipts from pictures shown at theaters they owned.
The movie business is like owning an ice cream stand on the boardwalk. If it rains that Sunday, you lose that business forever. And obviously, if you close a theater for a day, or for an hour, or for a week, or for a month, that business will never be recouped.
Since movies could not be shown without union workers there to show them, control of the Projectionist Union would give the mob a way to shake down the entire industry. At the union's 1934 convention in Louisville, Kentucky, the mob imported its muscle to ensure that George Brown was elected president. His first official act was to name Willie Byoff his personal representative. The Mafia now had one of the movie industry's most powerful unions in its back pocket. On November 30th, 1935, at exactly 8 p.m., screens went dark in the middle of the first feature at 500 Paramount theaters around the Midwest. The moguls back in Hollywood got the message and quickly caved to the mob's demands. They agreed to a formula by which each of the major studios would pay the mob $50,000 a year. The smaller ones, $25,000.
At one point, one of the studio executives, one of the people with Fox, came in with a paper bag full of money. He walks into the room, there's Willie Byoff there, and he's just gnashing his teeth, and he throws the paper bag onto the bed and says, "Here it is," and out he walks, and that's how it went, one after another.
From 1936 to 1940, the mob shook down the studios for millions of dollars. In L.A., Johnny Rosselli kept an eye on Willie Byoff for the Chicago mob. With a penthouse office at Hollywood and Vine, Byoff was on top of the world.
Byoff begins to think he is a mogul. He begins to think he is in charge. He's upping the ante. He's demanding more favors. He's demanding, his girlfriend gets to see the screenings. They get invited to the Academy Awards or else.
But as quickly as it had been built up, his corrupt kingdom began to collapse. Byoff's increasingly brazen behavior drew attention to his shadowy past. It was discovered that he had evaded a pimping conviction 15 years before in Chicago. California officials turned up more damaging evidence, including a $100,000 check tying Byoff to the powerful chairman of 20th Century Fox, Joseph Skank.
Of course, when the IRS saw $100,000 floating from Skank to Byoff, they jumped right in and started their investigation.
Assistant U.S. Attorney Boris Kostelanetz successfully prosecuted Skank for tax evasion in 1941. The movie industry rushed in to protect its own. The testimony of Skank and other moguls led to the indictments of Willie Byoff, George Brown, and Chicago mobster Nick Dean. Dean pleaded guilty to extortion and was sentenced to 8 years. Byoff and Brown were tried and convicted on the same charge. Despite the disintegration of their Hollywood racket, Johnny Rosselli and the leadership of the Chicago mob remained untouched. Then, in early 1943, word got out that Nick Dean was ready to sing. The mob's response was swift and savage. On the afternoon of February 2nd, firemen found the body of Dean's mistress, Estelle Carey, beaten, stabbed, and burned to death in her Chicago apartment. While the murder of Estelle Carey silenced Nick Dean, it had the opposite effect on Willie Byoff.
Willie Byoff, seeing Estelle Carey burned to death, figures that's his next venture. He's got to stay away from cigarette lighters. The squeeze is on. And the wrong squeeze came on because he started to confess to everybody. He started to name everybody. And he turned into a little squealer.
With Byoff on board, the feds brought charges against the bosses of the Chicago syndicate.
It was sensational. Nobody'd heard of any sort of racket like it. It was the first time that the nation was exposed to the idea that a crime syndicate might operate on a national scale like that.
In late December, after a 3-month trial, the leaders of the Chicago mob were found guilty of racketeering. Johnny Rosselli, whose high-level Hollywood connections had made him seem invulnerable, was headed to prison for the first time in his life. Willie Byoff, meanwhile, would serve a reduced sentence, change his name, and settle in Phoenix. But on November 4th, 1955, the mob finally caught up to him.
Little Rat came out of a house where he was playing cards, and he needed to get some more cash. He climbed into his truck, stepped on the starter, and landed up in a tree in that yard, in bits and pieces.
The Mafia had made good on a warning issued to Byoff 15 years before. Anybody who resigns from the mob resigns feet first.